And with that, we are ready to kick off our first fireside chat of the day. Our fireside chat host, Kara Swisher, is one of the most powerful voices in tech media. She is editor-at-large of New York Media, host of the Pivot podcast, and executive producer of the Coach Conference, a level that we still aspire to as Techsylvania as a role model. So Kara co-founded former Recode and Code owner Revere Digital, and before that co-produced and co-hosted the Wall Street Journal's The All Things Digital with Walt Mossberg. She's done several very, very legendary onstage interviews, such as with Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And we certainly hope that the conversation today that she's going to have is going to have its own place in history going forward. She's going to interview Tony Fadell, the inventor of the iPod. So please give a warm welcome to Kara and Tony.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, everybody.
Hi. We got to get Tony on there. I'm seeing you and not Tony. I'd rather not interview you. There you are. Oh, there he is.
I'm right here.
You did a longer biography of me, but Tony really is the legend of this pair, at least. Not just the iPod, but he can talk about that, but also Nest, which I used this morning. I do turn off all the spying parts, Tony. I'm teasing you, but I use it and I love it. It's a wonderful product. So let's start talking a little bit about entrepreneurship, because this is about we've had many interviews and talked about the various products you're making over time, that you've made and are making over time. And I want to sort of get to the heart of your history for people who don't know, and how you became an entrepreneur. And if you talk a little bit about your influences and what you think motivated you to move onto the path, I think would be really helpful to listeners.
Sure, no problem. Well, Kara, it's great to be here, and great to be here, everyone. The big thing for me is that I had my own business in about fourth grade, and I was selling eggs door to door. I would buy the eggs and I would sell eggs. This was in the late 70s to people. And I learned that having money in my hands gave me this freedom. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And then just a few years later, can I ask you
a question? Why eggs? What was not like
eggs was the easiest thing. It was Rochester, New York, and there was a farmer who said, I'll sell you bulk eggs. So I just went door to door with my brother with a wagon. And so I was like, oh, make some money. And from there, I got an Apple II, and I started meeting people because of the Apple II, other geeks in around Detroit, Michigan. And I started a company called Quality Computers there. Joe Gleason and I, and started selling Apple II hardware and software, doing all the, back in the day when it was mail order in the back of a magazine. And we started writing our own software to make the things we sold easier to use on the Apple II. And so that was great. And then it just continued. I did my own processor company and sold some processors to Apple for the Apple II and 2GS. Then from there, it ultimately got to General Magic, in 1991 in Silicon Valley. So I've always had this kind of streak of, hey, taking what I wanted to do and turning it into something cool.
Why was it that why did you choose that? Because there's lots of areas you could go off into companies like IBM, whether it was any of these things, because there weren't that many people around in the nascent early days. And there was a whole ecosystem off of Apple and IBM and all the different computing platforms. Why did you pick entrepreneurism versus going into a company? Because the choice is often stark for a lot of people.
Yeah, great question. So I actually had, right before I went to General Magic, I had my own company at the time called Constructive Instruments. We were making multimedia word processors for kids for education. Mm-hmm. And so I was the CEO, was doing all this stuff in Ann Arbor, just next to the University of Michigan. And one day I was just sitting there going, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing as a CEO, of a company of 4 people. We're creating software, but there was no internet at the time. So I couldn't just go read, online and get tips and watch videos. So I was like, I need to go work somewhere where they're doing this, where I can learn and I can meme it and I can be there every day. And that was where the whole thrust was to General Magic, because I really wanted to go work with people who made things that I loved, that I cherished, and go learn how they did it, so that when I want to do it again for myself, I will have learned through them and through their eyes, and then try to, replicate that in some way.
Well, talk about General Magic, because there's just been a film about it, and it's gotten a lot of attention about that. It's sort of the company. I've always thought of it that way, of the internet space, with all kinds of stuff that then fell off of it, and of course it never succeeded.
Well, yeah, General Magic, one of the biggest failures. And as you said, there's the movie about it. So that tells the story much better than ever I could. But General Magic was really, in a nutshell, we were trying to build the iPhone just 15 years too soon. 15 years too soon, as you know. Right. And there was no internet. There was no real digital communications at the time. There was none. So literally, we were trying to build this thing in a vacuum of technology that it needed to connect to make it really, truly useful. And frankly, the people who we were building it for, we were building it for us, the people in the company. If you actually looked outside, nobody had email. Nobody knew what downloadable games were and all these other things. Right. So by the time we shipped it, it took many, many years to ship it. But by the time we shipped it, it fell flat. It was because we had designed it for us to please the geeks inside of us. And then, ultimately it finally materialized 15 years later in the iPhone. And then, in another incarnation was Android, right? Because both Andy and I were both there at General Magic back in the day.
Right. Well, talk about that idea of ideas being not just before their time, but where you got the inspiration for these ideas. I mean, there was a whole crew at General Magic that did go on to invent all kinds of other things that were all forks of that road, really, that forked off on different things, whether it's Piero Midyar or yourself or Andy Rubin or many others. When you have an idea like that that's well before its time, and you've had a number of them and then sort of continued, how do you keep iterating in your mentality and not to let it go? Because when you have that particular company raised a lot of money, it was well before its time, you didn't have anyone buying it, you had a lot of you had a lot of telco consumers for sure. How do you manage that when you think it's going to just take off and where it doesn't get a tipping point?
Right. Well, for me, luckily at that point, I was really young, so I could keep staying heads down in doing the thing that I was passionate about. Because even at the University of Michigan, I was trying to build pocket computers in the back.
Why pocket computers? What was
it was the next step. So there was mainframes, then personal desktop computers, then personal laptops. And then it moved to, hey, why can't we just take this on the go with us wherever in our pocket? So I was always like, whoa, this could be the next big thing. I loved hardware, I loved software, so putting them together into this new thing, that's what took me to General Magic. And then I was like, and as you peel back the onion and you see more and more details over those years, you go, this is really going to happen. And so for me, I just kept staying heads down. Many people from General Magic, whatever, went off to the internet. They went off, like you said, they went to eBay or built eBay, what have you. But I said, I want to stay with devices because I think these devices are going to hit. That's what I knew. I could see the future. And so I just wanted to stay there when everybody else was jumping ship.
What does that take? Because, where did you get the original pocket devices? There were a lot of people thinking about this. And obviously there's a lot of stuff in science fiction and things like that. Was there any place that you thought this was next? It was just the natural iteration from mainframe to the desktop to laptop to...
Well, I watched the consumer electronics industry and I watched what happened to music, right? We watched what happened with, cassette players were the big things. And then it became a Walkman, same thing with DVDs or CDs and such like that. So I was like, this is going to happen. It's already happening in computing. It's going to just happen at the right time. And that was also the same time when tablet computers were trying to take off, right? We had Go and EO and all these other things. So it just felt like this was going to happen. At General Magic, we didn't have the consumer in mind, who was going to purchase it. And so my next step after General Magic was thinking about who would really purchase it, the why, not the what. Everybody was, at General Magic, we were all thinking about the what, not the why. And so I learned to think and focus on the why.
Okay, so that's a really interesting concept, the what. So most people can envision various things, and right now there's all kinds of inventions, and we'll get to that in a second. But when you're thinking about, you need to have a what to have a why, correct or not? Absolutely. You always have to say what it is with the new technology and make sure your technology is something new, differentiated, so it's different than what the incumbents have, right? Something that the other competitors will not see. So you're going to take that and use that to make your differentiation around it. Right.
But then you can't just say, well, it's just a smaller computer. And people are like, well, why do I need a smaller computer? What's that for? And you have to get into the why and into the psyche of a person and to the various different consumer segments to try to understand how they would use it in their daily life and start from that point of view, as opposed to speeds and feeds and processors and screen sizes and all that other stuff. Almost everybody who comes from engineering background or out of tech starts with the what and continues with the what. They forget to flip to the why.
Right. And how do you do that? How did you do that? So you're making this thing and you put it out there, and I think you all went ta-da, and then there was no ta-da, right? Like
there was no ta-da.
So what do you do at that moment when you still think your idea is correct, but it hasn't proven itself? There's no proof of concept.
Well, first you take the gut punch and go, what the hell did we do? Because I was, was very green at the time because just staring at the screen, building the thing. Then you start going, wait a second, people don't know what it is. They don't understand why it should be there in their life. And then when you flip that script and you look from their shoes and you look at the thing, you go, why would I want this? And you go from a beginner, stop trying to impress the geek next to you and say, isn't this cool? Start to think about how you give a superpower to your parents or your friends or your grandparents. What is that thing you're creating? And why is that superpower that you're creating for them going to make their life so much better? And if you can give them a superpower, let them go and tell all their friends about it and go, oh my God, look at what I can do. Because now this technology doesn't make me feel dumb. It makes me feel powerful.
All right. So one of the things about the General Logic device, I actually have one, which is amazing in the basement. It did a lot of things, but when you look at it, it did everything we do now with it. It had the little, and it did an iconic way. It had the mail. It had the moving to the mailbox. It had
emojis.
Had emojis. It had all kinds of things. When you have all those ideas in one place, which all were good, by the way. If you look at it, every single piece is somewhere else. You can look at that with a company like AOL and others. Everything was there in the place. What do you do then when it doesn't work? Where do you start again to try to get that why? How do you pick? So you picked iPod, right?
Well, the next thing after that was Philips. And I went to Philips and built the Velo and Nino, which was a mobile computer or mobile pocket computer for mobile professionals. Right. So what I did was I said, okay, well, what is it that people are going to need? Why do they need this? And it wasn't that general consumers needed email. They didn't need email. They didn't even have email. They didn't even know what it was. They didn't have internet. But mobile professionals had a big Rolodex. So they wanted to take that on the go with them from their computer. They had this, electronic Rolodex. They wanted to do email on the go because they did know what email was. They wanted to use spreadsheets and these things. So it started from, well, what are they doing every day on their laptop? How can you make it more convenient so that you can communicate? Here's what they do and the problems they have because they don't want to lug because the laptops were nowhere near as small as they are today. And you said, let's try to make that. And that's where it came from is what are they doing every day? Why are they doing it? And can we make it more convenient for them in this new form factor? And then we could talk to them about their killer problems. Right. And then we'd have the painkiller for those pain.
Right. And you'd add them over time, add the various different features, I guess, or attributes.
It was actually stripping away a lot of stuff. Right. And, the real thing was we were somewhat successful doing the Philips products. But what was really successful at the time was the Palm Pilot. Right. And the Palm Pilot stripped out even more things. It didn't have email. It just had a calendar and a Rolodex and note taking. That's all it did. And that's what actually took off, first with mobile professionals and then with some consumers.
So why do you think that was? Here you had a product that there's often products that are better, but they don't catch with the consumers. I've noticed that lots of times where there's very complexified things that are better, like they do more things. And I think a lot of Silicon Valley does make those things. And then often a very simple thing breaks through. Yeah,
exactly. And let me give you a perfect analogy. The iPod. The iPod only started as a digital music player.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
It started with just music. And then over time, we added podcasts. Then we added photos, then we added video, and then we added games. So each time it got more complex, but that was over a series of 4 or 5 years, as opposed to coming out and saying, this thing does all of these things in day one. We're doing this one thing and we're doing it incredibly well. And then we add them in over time. And that's what ultimately allowed the iPhone to happen, was because people already knew what email was. They knew what internet browsing was. And they were like, oh, I know what an iPod is with all these entertainment things. That's what the iPhone really was, if you remember Steve's original pitch.
So how did you get to that? You were there at Philips, and that's a big company. It was a big, powerful company at the time. And how did you feel within that? That's kind of a little big
Philips?
for you. You don't like big companies. You strike me as.
I hate big companies.
Yeah.
And I learned really how much I hated big companies when I was at Philips. No, I went, and you probably remember General Magic. It was a crazy sandbox, toy box. There was no rules. It was fun.
Yeah.
Then going to Philips, the first thing when I got into Philips was they were like, you need to take a drug test. And I was like, wow. What? And everybody you're going to hire has to take a drug test. So like, what? Yeah. And then from there, they were like, fill out all these forms. And then they put me in a dark paneled office from the 50s, right? With like smoke stains on the ceiling and everything. And I'm like, I just left this incredibly fun thing into this. And then you learn all about politics, and you learn about big business and business lines. Wow. It was quite an experience, but one I needed to learn, one that you absolutely need to learn.
Why?
Well, because one thing is all startups start to grow over time.
Yeah.
So it's great to know when you're starting to get bigger what you don't want to be.
Right.
So that you can start to think about what you want to be. That's one thing. And until you understand what an organization looks like of 200 people, 1,000, 10,000, at the time Philips had 270,000 people, you can really understand what these structures begin to look like, so that you have a model in your head of what you're growing into, right? At the time, the biggest company I was at was, just about a couple hundred people. So I never had seen, what these massive, elephantine organizations look like.
Right. And so how did you get to Apple? What was the leap? Obviously, huge fan. And
after Philips, really what happened was I started my own startup company to do MP3 players and digital media. Right. And the internet crunch, I got funded and all this stuff. And then the internet crush happened in April 2000, and I couldn't find another dollar anywhere. Right. And so struggling, still working on it. And literally I had lunch with a friend who I worked with from General Magic. That same friend had lunch with a person from Apple who asked him, who do you know who is doing something around music and digital devices? And he goes, oh, that's funny. I was just meeting with this guy who I know really well.
Wow.
And it was in 48 hours. And then I got a call, and then it was come and be a contractor. And what do you think you could build for us?
Wow. Just like that. Just like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally, we were at the end. We were at the end of our rope in January 2001.
Right. All right. I want to move a little quicker. So you get to Apple, you're a contractor, and you want to create this digital music player. Talk a little bit about what the challenges you faced, because it was a hit instantly when it came out. It was pretty much.
It was a hit for only Mac lovers.
Right. Okay. All right.
It was critical success, a business failure, because it only worked on the Mac, and we actually had two and a half really tough years with the iPod, to tell you the truth.
Well, talk about that. Why?
Well, why? Because we didn't have PC connectivity, right? Right. If you remember Apple in 2001, it had about $500 million in debt, and it had $250 million in the bank. It had less than 1% market share in the entire U.S., not the world, just the U.S., less than 1%. Everyone says it's 4 or 5. It was 1. Yeah, okay. And so we had to bet the farm on this whole project around iPod. But Steve saw the iPod as selling more Macs. Right. So he only wanted to tie the iPod to the Macintosh. So when we were having meetings, I'm like, Steve, look. He goes, well, the iPod, I think it was $4.99 or $3.99 at the time. Right. And he's like, it's $3.99. They can afford that. I said, no, it's the price of the iPod plus the price of a Mac. I said, it's too expensive. And so we had a Skunkworks project, and you probably know the story of Walt being involved in that, right? Which was literally, we had to convince Steve that we needed to have PC connectivity. We had a Skunkworks program doing it in the background, and he never wanted to ship. He said, over my dead body. And then we ultimately had a tete-a-tete, and Walt came in to then review the PC one, and he said, Yeah, it's pretty good. I'd ship it. And that was
That's
was
Walt
the next.
Mossberg.
Yes, Walt Mossberg.
Right. Yeah. So when you think about the idea of it, it still was, whether it was just for the Mac, the idea of it was a big one. The idea of this on-the-go device, it really was the first on-the-go, and getting people used to the idea of an on-the-go device.
It was the very first consumer-focused digital device. During the time there was all kinds of other MP3 players, but they were really made for geeks. They were really hard to use, blah, blah, blah. This was the first consumer, your mom could use it, anyone could use it kind of device. And and everybody loves music.
And when you're making a device like that, and you're thinking about what the most important part was, since there were MP3 players, the concept was obviously there. People have had Walkmans. I mean, it's just a quick jump to that. It's not all the music in your pocket, which was the marketing, I think, what Steve talked about.
Thousand songs in your pocket.
Right. When you think about that, what do you think the most important element of that was, that success?
Well, I think one is, not an element, but philosophy was full integration from the lowest level hardware all the way up to the software that managed it. At the time, there was management software, and then there were devices. And they weren't all designed to be the same. So, most people think the iPod, but really the success was iTunes plus iPod together, and that full vertical integration of making sure they work seamlessly together, and putting the more complicated features on the software on the desktop, and then making sure it was just you consume music only on the iPod. So it would be really, really easy.
So the seamlessness of it. When you think about designing things like that, and I want to get to the Nest, you think about seamlessness. There's also design and the beauty of it. I mean, one of the things I remember when Bill Gates was talking about it into an off the record session of Journal People, he said, "Oh, it's just a hard drive in a white box, pretty white box." And he said it was trivial. I'll never forget. He said it's trivial. And I said, if it's so trivial, why didn't you make it? So easy. Why didn't you?
And then they made the Zune in a brown box.
Right, exactly. A bad box. So when you think about that, when you have something so simple, simplicity is hard to do as an entrepreneur, correct? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, simplicity is really the hard thing. When you think about a step, when you think about a step like installation or your configuration of the device when you buy it and things of that nature, people overlook that. They just worry about the usage of the device. They forget about all the friction points. So if you do a great job of marketing, that's great. People are like, wow, you have expectations set in their mind. They run to the store and they emotionally buy this thing. But if they take it out of the box and they run into barrier after barrier, that emotional energy starts to just fade fast. And then by the time you get to use it, you're finally, what you want is these emotional high points all the way along to the very first use. So there's so much work that goes in usually to making it simple that most engineers don't like doing it. Most people don't want to spend time doing it, the hard stuff, to make it easy. Because what you're doing is, if you don't do the hard stuff, then that means millions of customers on the other side have to do the hard stuff that you didn't want to do because you didn't feel like it was fun to build that.
Right. So do you think about that when you're making products? So when you started to do Nest, I don't want to go through every iteration of where you went in your journey, but Nest was the same thing. You and I talked about, so you looked at these things which had never been iterated before, and then said why would you say that's something people want easier? Like a thermostat device.
Well, the first thing was if you talk to people, they hated their thermostat. They wanted to hide them away. They begrudgingly used them, but they never realized that 50% of their energy and also a lot of their comfort was controlled by this device that they hated. So that was the first thing. So there's money and comfort were there. They were ugly. So we're like, we gotta, let's supercharge this. And I'm also very much for the environment, for the planet. So I'm like, if we could cut down all of this energy waste, let's go for it. Let's make it beautiful. And, to your point about making it, making it not just attractive, but making it easy to use, we spent many, many months on just the installation process because we're like, oh my God, we're going to need professionals to install this. So if we can make it utterly simple, maybe we'll get 20 to 30% of our users to actually install it themselves and the other stuff, because that's going to be a huge barrier to sales.
Right.
So we worked so hard on it. We even included a screwdriver, all the screws, all the instructions, made videos and everything. Well, it turned out after our very first month, we looked at the data, 90% of them were self-installed, because we did such a seamless job of how to, how to install it. We made special connectors so you didn't have to do these old jumpers, and it was really geeky. And all of a sudden people were like writing online, like, I did this myself. And they were telling people like, you can do this too. I didn't think I could. It was daunting. And then they and so it became this flywheel, and we didn't even have to market it because it gave people superpowers.
So when you this idea of superpowers you keep talking about, and one of the things, before I finish this, when you were doing this, what was it that, there's a lot of entrepreneurs listening, what was it that you said thermostats rather than social media or, or different devices? What was the thing that, or continuing in phones?
So for me, the biggest issue was that I had been running into this problem for years. We had a remote home in Lake Tahoe, and we'd have to go up and back to the house. And the house, if you turned up the heat, it would take 10 hours to heat up. So either you left the heat going when you left, or when you got there, you'd wait 10 hours and you'd be frozen. Right. And so I tried to make a device to make it really easy to remote control it, and it was really hard. And so 10 years later, after trying all this, 10 years later, I searched the web going, someone's got to fix it, and no one did. So I just said, I'm going to fix it, because we now have these devices in our hands, right? We all have these devices in our hands, and this can be the remote control for your world. I'm like, it's all there. Let's go make that end device to make this simple. And that's how it all started. So it was a real pain point for me. It was a real pain point, and I was like, people have these pain points. Every single home, most homes have this problem.
Right. So we're going to get some questions from the audience in just a tiny bit of time, but I want to talk about two things that you've talked about here, which I think are really important when you think about making consumer devices, or even for the enterprise. It doesn't really matter. Superpowers and then remote control. I was thinking of alarm systems, for example, and everything I do now is on a phone. I turn off and on, not with numbers, not with keypads, not with all kinds of things. I use the Nest, and it is really convenient to turn off when I'm upstairs or downstairs and things like that. Talk about where you think that's going. We're right now in, I don't know, the 2008, the 10th or 12th year of the iPhone, which is your remote control. And the iPhone really did set it all off, the idea of this. Without the iPhone, I think that's probably the most important device in the last, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think.
Oh, without a doubt.
Where does it go from here? Because everyone's like, well, there's no innovation in this area. What do you see as important? You talk two things. What is the superpowers, and what is the thing that gets remote controlled, especially in the age of COVID, when you have accelerating trends? I think COVID is going to accelerate every single trend that has happened.
It already has. And I think we've seen 10 years happen in, in 3-4 months of adoption. So for me, if you look at what happened to laptops, it's the same exact thing that's happening to smartphones. It's little speeds and feeds, and you're changing the cameras a little bit better, but there's no really big reason to upgrade anymore, because we've gotten to this plateau. Now there's going to be new things over time, but more or less we've gotten to another plateau. Where it all comes from now, and the innovation comes from, is the apps on the device, or the apps controlling or talking to either a server or another piece of hardware somewhere else, or actually a peripheral bonded to it. So that's where you're going to see all of and we're already seeing all of the kind of innovation going on. And so for people to say, oh, I can't wait for the next iPhone, sure, no problem, but it's not, it's going to be 95% the same. And that's how these things go. So what you have to look for is the innovation beyond it, and seeing this as an enabler for something that never, like, we invest in companies today, like we have fishermen who use this to go and look at how their fish or shrimp are feeding in Indonesia on their thing. They can see the growth, right? So it's about taking this and giving them the superpower that they wish they had in all of these different businesses: farming, food, biotech, med tech. You're a physician in the box. We've been looking at like COVID testing. How can you COVID testing through this? It's these kinds of things that we're going to see it morph into. many application-specific things, usually with some small piece of enabling hardware that gives superpowers to people that are not just general consumers, but very segmented industries
so
that
that's
have
where
been
you're
wanting
investing.
a platform. Always, yes.
Always, right now. Not another new thing. Like, you don't see a device emerging that is different, that you say 95% not different. Is that the end of innovation here?
Well, I think on the smartphone side, yes. But then, we have the watches. But the watches still are a peripheral of the phone. And until we have really great speech recognition and great AI to be able to really get rid of the thing, it's really just a notifications engine for your phone in your pocket.
It is indeed.
So that's one. Then we have VR and AR. Like VR, I was doing VR in 1988.
You were.
When Jaron Lanier was, young, and I was young too. So VR, well, it's sort of happening. Then there's AR, which I do believe in, but the AR technology is kind of still general magic type. Well, I think we're still 5, 7, 10 years away from the good enough technology to get that first, that first real experience for general.
So in the what? We're in the what of it? In the what?
We're in the what? Yeah, we're absolutely in the what. I think we understand the why, actually, especially in AR. But the what is not good enough.
Right.
We need much better what technology to get this other device that's going to be on us. So go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish.
No, so where I'm seeing a lot of innovation now is in robotics in warehouses, robotics in retail, various other things, not necessarily replacing people, but augmenting people so that they can, they can have more efficiency and less kind of mundane work.
So where do you see the most innovation happening then? What area? Oh, go ahead. Well, just one second. I want to ask him this side. Yeah. I can hear you. Just one second. Are you going to say something? Go ahead.
No, I was just saying we have some questions from the audience, but please go ahead and ask those.
All right. I want to ask this last one. So we'd love to get that in. So where do you see the most innovation happening from your perspective? What is
Wow, that's tough. What's really amazing now is, the whole world of silicon and sensors was more or less dead for about 20 years. And now it's just totally coming back to life in every which way, whether it's an AV, don't get me started on AV, autonomous vehicles, or it's robots, or it's sensors that you put in the phone, or these kinds of things. So we're seeing sensors, we're seeing processors, especially around AI happening. And it's going from the smallest device all the way to the server. So we're seeing a ton of hardware happening now. And so we've heard from Mark and Andreessen many times, software eats the world. Well, for me, the only way software can eat the world is when there's a new hardware and software paradigm, a whole new platform that comes out. And the iPhone was one of them. iPod was another one. That when you have this new alignment, a full vertical stack of new hardware with software, you can then create something totally different. And then once you've nailed it, then software eats the rest of that world to take it all into all the other segments around it. So it's really interesting to see how much hardware is being created. That means we're at the cusp of some new thing that software we can fully integrate that's going to create some new things we've never seen before. It's only when we have software and hardware disruptive innovation at the same time, then you see new markets, new industries spawn.
Okay, questions from the audience?
Yes, fantastic. So we have a question from our good friend Corentin Cremet that asks Tony, iPad, two devices that were before the iPod, and the question is, did you know about them? Did you learn from them, or did you really do like ground up invention when you came across? Because people are asking how are you dealing with previous products that are around and then building on top of that?
I will quote Steve Jobs, who quoted Picasso, "Great artists steal." So to be really clear, I had every single device torn apart on my desk, learning from every single one of them. When I went and presented to Steve the very first iPod, I had a binder this thick with all the competitive stuff. I had all the competitive devices in boxes. I had everything there to show how much detail went into understanding the what, but also the why. And so all the time, if you don't go and learn from what's been done before, then you're destined to repeat the same problems and and have the same failures that they did. So you always have to be up on top of the very latest and try to learn from others' things that they've done, not just business pitches or whatever. You want to learn and then experience it so you can see what failures. Right now I'm in digital crypto land. I'm learning all about digital crypto keys and taking them apart and figuring out what's going on.
Why are you doing
Because that's the future. That's a future for right now. It feels like the MP3 of 1999 right now. Crypto is in the MP3 world of 1999.
Wow.
What is the iPod of crypto?
So money.
Well, money is that's a format. It's like MP3 or AAC or whatever else. But what is the consumer experience with crypto that's not a geek, right? Today, you got to be incredibly geeky to do anything with crypto.
Fair point. Next question.
Yes, so the other question, the final question, then we'll wrap it up, is from Radu Butorianu. And he's asking, Tony, what do you think in terms of the possibility that for smartphones specifically, have we reached like a bottleneck and like a peak of innovation, or do you think there's still lots of new things coming with regards to smartphones?
I think he kind of just answered that, but is there another thing though? Go beyond that. Like you said, there's going to be iterations of it. Is there another device that isn't the phone, that isn't the watch?
I think if you look at anything that's glasses oriented, it's all technology. The technology is not there. We're still years away from technology. If it's the watch is good enough, okay? But the problem is we don't have enough software. We don't have enough software to make it truly a standalone device. So all of these things that we're talking about are all companions to the phone. One day they'll get good enough, both on the hardware as well as the software, that they'll be standalone. But that's a long ways away.
And there's no other device besides glasses and the watch. Is there anything that you would imagine, just from a totally creative point of view, if you could invent anything and the software was there?
If I could invent, let's see. Good question. No, I don't have anything right now that's
not a hat.
Well, okay. I'll tell you. I think we should have something like a hat. Actually, you're on the right track. But we need a privacy hat. What is the cloak around you that you can wear so that all of this surveillance capitalism can get shut down in the real physical world? So what would be that blanket around you to make you be not invisible to people, but invisible to the digital world?
Wow.
How can you do that? And so I've been brainstorming and thinking about that, because I think we're going to want that invisibility cloak, digital invisibility cloak.
Yeah, masks work now. Anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Anyway, Tony, that was fascinating. That was really fascinating. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much. And I will talk to you soon for sure.
Thanks, Cara. And good luck with Sway and all the stuff you're working on. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you
stuff.
very much.
So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Cara. Thank you, Tony, for both being with us virtually. Very, very much appreciated. Hope to see you next time in person in Cluj.
All right. Bye.
Talk soon, Cara.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.